Welcome to YourTown television program. My name is Jeff Kline. I'm your host for this segment for the Naval Postgraduate School Items of Interest. Today we have with us our Dean of Research, Dr. Jeff Paduan, and he will be talking to us about why research is important at the school, what some of the things we do and how we integrate it with our students, and a little bit about himself. So Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
I'd always like to start the show off talking a little bit about you so that the people who watch the show get a little bit to know more about our neighbors. So how long have you lived in Monterey?
I've been here almost 26 years. So my wife and I moved from San Diego up here in 1991 to start working for the school.
So where did you get your doctorate from? Where did you do your research at?
And before San Diego, as a researcher there for a few years, I was in Oregon. So I was a graduate student at Oregon State University, a Beaver, and in oceanography. So my background is marine science, and I was at the program there. Oregon State has a fairly large program, but I grew up in Michigan on a lake, and somehow got this interest in the ocean, and ended up on the West Coast for school, for graduate school, and then San Diego and Monterey. So after about 30 years on the West Coast, my mother has finally stopped asking when I'm
when you're going to move
back to Michigan.
She's finally realized you're now a West Coaster.
Yes.
So you went from fresh water actually to salt water in the interest areas as far as that goes. Well, what kind of research did you do at MPS then, or for your doctorate, and then did you continue to do that here at the school?
Sure. I have been involved in a theme of research to some degree. I worked as a student in Oregon on observations of ocean temperature, salinity, currents, wind over the water, all based on what at that time was sort of state-of-the-art sensors put out in big moorings or buoys in the center of the ocean. And we had data from those systems, and we were looking at the air-sea interaction problems around the process, around how does the wind move the water and heat it and cool it, and looking at that through observations. I went to San Diego, started using this brand new thing based on satellites. In the 1970s, they came up with the possibility to track things from space, and by the 1980s, oceanographers were starting to build sensors that you could track from space. And so we were involved in a project that continues today to seed 300 or 400 very inexpensive surface drifting buoys around the world that are tracked for 1 to 2 years, and they give us a measure of the ocean currents as well as the surface temperature.
Well, tell me how all the collection of the data that you're talking about, what does it do? Why do we collect that data? What impact does it have?
Well, collecting data in the ocean environment has a big impact on our ability to predict weather and climate in particular. Because the oceans are 70% of the planet, they control our weather to a large extent. And it's pretty hard to be out there. Navy officers are used to being out there, but not many other people are. And fishermen, it's a pretty tough environment. And so the data from the ocean, as measured directly, was always pretty sparse. And that's been the big revolution in our field in the last 20 years, is miniaturization, computers, battery capabilities have all conspired to allow us to make these autonomous platforms that can be out in the ocean for months or years on their own, sending back some of the same data that we needed to take a ship and 20 or 30 people to collect when I was a student.
Well, I'm going to have you back on the show sometime just to talk about your focused research, but I want to ask one more question before we jump to the Dean of Research responsibilities that you have. We have a lot of excellent schools around the Monterey Bay area. When you were working in this area, did you work closely with Moss Landing Marine Labs or Santa Cruz or anyone else with an oceanography department?
I have for the 26 years I've been here. That's been one of the terrific aspects of being at the Naval Postgraduate School and being in Monterey is the other schools that exist right in the area. And I've been fairly involved with them. We coordinate pretty regularly. The directors of the marine programs in Santa Cruz and Moss Landing, Mbari, and Hopkins, the Stanford Center, and others get together regularly and try to coordinate our programs because they turn out to be highly complementary. They're not doing all the same things, and so working together has been a really a good approach.
And you get a chance to share resources at times as well.
Yes.
As well as data. That's great. Well, how did you come to MPS? How did we capture you?
Well, I mentioned the West Coast transit. I was in Oregon. I had an opportunity to work for a few years in San Diego, and during that time, the department here was advertising for a faculty position that I applied to, the Oceanography Department
right.
at the Naval Postgraduate School. Looking back, what's impressive to me about that is that our department in oceanography, others at the school, really are nationally ranked or nationally known and working day to day with their colleagues in other universities. So when the job posting came up for the Naval Postgraduate School, I was quite familiar with it because I had actually worked with some of the team from here in my thesis work at Oregon State. They were part of the experiment I was on, and so it's really quite a dynamic and outreaching department. So it was just a natural kind of academic progression for me.
Well, you make a good point. It's not common wisdom that NPS houses some world famous faculty and capabilities. Particularly in the academic world, they understand that. We have an excellent reputation. But most people in the local area don't understand that, and sometimes our own service doesn't even understand the capabilities that we actually have and are able to share. Well, let's switch now to your Dean of Research responsibilities.
Sure.
First, what does the Dean of Research do at MPS?
Well, the Dean of Research tries to do what other similar positions would try to do at schools. We are involved with managing the research programs that are created by the faculty. So I think a common misunderstanding would probably be in thinking that we control that. We just manage it because this university and as our others are set up around the faculty, and the faculty are the engine that create projects. They pitch them to the potential sponsors. In our office, processes that paperwork. So I was thinking about that question and realized I think my job is three things. It's around paperwork, opportunities, and explanations, I think. The paperwork is just like it sounds. Everything has to be documented. We're taking funds from one government agency into the school, into another. That has to be documented. The opportunities are where I wish I could spend more time. That's helping the faculty to learn about programs that are out there, making them able to access them easily, and just supporting those opportunities. The explanations part, I had no idea was going to be my job until I started doing it, because NPS, in this sense, is not normal, and we exist inside the Navy, and there is no real analog to NPS in the Navy. In other
I don't
places.
think there's an analog to MPS in any
in the country,
in the
world,
that's
maybe.
Right.
And so that's where the explanation part comes in. And when, depending on which slice of the Navy you're talking with, you'll have to sometimes explain why do we have this model based on faculty? Because it's not a top-down. It's not a military model in that way. It's a very flat faculty-based system.
Well, speaking of the explanation part, here's one I know a frequent question you get. Our primary mission at NPS is to provide graduate education to junior and mid-grade officers to prepare them to apply that education in their fields, in their respective fields, to increase for national defense. What does research have to do with that?
It's a good question, a fair one, and I do get it a lot. And I think it's something that a lot of people might not really appreciate. Part of the evolution or the changes in approaches that educators use as you move from high school to college to postgraduate college or graduate schools, and particularly as a graduate program that's really trying to influence the students and make them more effective in areas at the cutting edge of those areas. That's really why we need to use what I call the university model or the research model, because the classroom portion of what we do is similar everywhere that talks about those topics in physics or mechanical engineering, the business school. But if you're doing graduate work, by definition you're working at the edge or the cutting edge of those fields. And so the classroom part does not cover what you don't know and what's going to be learned tomorrow. And so then you're in a situation where the experience really needs to be a combination of the classroom part and some kind of hands-on exploration of the field that you're working in. And that's where the research comes in. So research serves a tremendous portion of the education mission.
Right.
The act of doing research, of investigating, learning to ask the questions, learning what is unknown about the field that you're in. And so it really is, we think, the best way to do that. And then you get down to the final question, well, who pays for it? And so if you want, it's an expensive proposition to have 400 or 500 faculty members, almost as many staff members, and a couple thousand students engaged in research projects. For the Navy to just pay for that time and effort, that would be a rather large bill for them. So instead, we use a cooperative model where the faculty compete for project funding from other organizations in the government, the National Science Foundation or the Office of Naval Research. And those projects then are funded from the outside in that way. But the outcome is what we hope will happen in most cases. The research projects support the activity, the students and faculty are engaged in it, and to be successful you have to compete and win out in at least some instances in those fields. So it also serves the purpose of maintaining competitiveness and excellence in the faculty. So it's a common model. Every major research university excuse me, uses that model, and the Navy, I think, wisely has allowed us to employ the same model.
Would you go so far as to say that it also helps inspire innovation within our students, even before and after they graduate?
I think it does. I hope it does, and I've seen it in our oceanography students that I've worked with and others. The thesis process that our students at the Naval Postgraduate School go through is a pretty different experience for those officer students. They come into the classroom early in their program here, and I think in a lot of cases are able to apply their expertise that they already have in being organized, approaching a problem, figuring out what the assignment is, and doing it. And I've seen a lot of those very successful students get to the thesis part and be completely surprised by the fact that nobody is going to tell them the answer. There's nowhere to look it up.
Figure it out.
They're going to have to figure it out and make the best case they can for what they think the answer or the next step in that area is. And it's such a different way of learning that it serves, I think, our students very well, because it just produces that kind of questioning attitude. So a little bit of questioning authority in a system that doesn't do much of that, I think goes a long way toward problem solving.
And problem solving and inspiring the innovation, etc. Well, you mentioned some of the sponsors of that research. Are there others you would like to raise? How about within the Navy itself? Do we have sponsorship inside the Navy, outside of the actual education mission?
We do. We get a fair bit of sponsorship. It's roughly as much funding for the campus here comes from outside sponsors for those research and investigations that we are talking about. As much money for that comes in as it does for the education mission. So it's a major part of what keeps us all going and funds the school. The Navy is the single biggest funder of that as well. So our biggest funder is the Office of Naval Research. They give us, for different projects, in the neighborhood of $20 million each year for several projects. And then it gets to be smaller chunks from there. And naval laboratories, the warfare systems that the Navy maintains. But then the Air Force, the Army Research Lab, a swath of the government, basically,
sure.
That, depending on the topic area, and that's something I've had to explain as well to the Navy at times, where they've looked at our budgets and our income sheets and said, why do you have all of this non-Navy money if you're a Navy school or a naval school? And
It's because other people learn to leverage this.
yeah, we've leveraged their money, and it's because of the diversity of programs. So the research, as we talked earlier, is there to support the graduate education mission.
Right.
And we've got roughly 80 degrees being given out in the school that spans the business areas to international affairs, to mechanical engineering, environmental sciences. And faculty have to compete in all of those areas. And the Navy is not necessarily the primary funder of research for the government for all of those areas.
Well, we have a couple of minutes left. Let's talk a little bit about those areas of research. You talked about the diversity of faculty we have based on the programs we have. Let's take a look at a chart that sort of shows some of the primary research areas, and can you talk to that a little bit?
This is a chart that we just completed for a summary of last year's research in 2016, and it just shows what we're calling our thrust areas, and you can see from the titles the kinds of areas that faculty work in at the school, ranging from battle space environment characterization, which actually is the area my field of oceanography
and meteorology,
sure. Fall into. We call it by a different name because of the applied work that we tend to do, but that's where that falls. You'll see other common areas today like cybersecurity, energy systems, and very important on the other end of the chart there are things like unmanned systems, which
right.
include robotics and robotics control systems that are very important to the Defense Department today.
Well, we only have about a minute left, so we have a new program called the Naval Research Program, NPS Naval Research Program. Can you say for about 30 seconds what that's about? Sure.
Yeah, I'll make it fast. We've been talking about what I call the standard university model. Faculty compete with UC Berkeley or other colleges nearby for that funds. We do have one Navy-funded program. It's a block fund to the school that our faculty compete for that we call the Naval Research Program. And it's unique because we go out each year to the Pentagon offices who are involved day to day in running the Navy and ask them for their real-time problem sets. And then we pitch ideas for studying those problems, and faculty get funded out of that pool. It allows us to learn about the Navy problem in a different way that we might not get from the National Science Foundation.
And we're able to leverage that money.
Yes.
Well, Dr. Paduan, thank you very much for being on the show. We have
pleasure.
A much better appreciation for the research program, and I think we're going to have you back to talk about oceanography specifically.
Love to do that.
All right. Well, thank you for joining the YourTown television program. I'm Jeff Kline, your host for the Naval Postgraduate School Issues, and we look forward to seeing you in our next show.